Hello and welcome to the Pro Social Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Matthew Watson with Pro Social Workers, and I'm joined today by Xander Kaig as well as Tiffany Jones, and we'll introduce ourselves. The purpose of the Pro Social Podcast is to humanize people who are different and dialogue across those differences, and then to stand for viewpoint, for ethical principles, all in the spirit of trying to promote viewpoint and political diversity. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been licensed in 5 states, and I'm privileged to work together to promote viewpoint and political diversity with my colleagues here today. I'll invite them to introduce themselves. Xander, would you like to introduce yourself, and then Tiffany?
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Hello, everybody. My name is Xander Kaig. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. I'm currently only licensed in 2 states, but at one point in time, I was licensed in 6 states. I live in Florida. I was the California NASW Social Worker of the Year in 2018 and the National NASW Social Worker of the Year in 2020, and was involved for a number of years in the NASW at the national level, specifically with the LGBT committee. And I'm part of Pro Social with Matt, and I'm just happy that you're here.
Thank you,
We'll
Xander.
pass it on to Tiffany.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tiffany Victoria Jones. I am a research methodologist. I am also a social worker. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I am in New Orleans, my hometown.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. We're excited to get to know you and learn a little bit about your experience and your background. We want to emphasize that each of us are affiliated with different organizations, and the viewpoints that we share today are entirely our own and are not necessarily those of our employers or other affiliated organizations. We're excited to have Tiffany with us. She is has a vast array of experience, and we've seen her in a number of other podcasts, and we think it's interesting. She has an interesting experience that highlights some of the challenges that come when we as social workers adhere to a viewpoint orthodoxy. And so we want to talk a little bit today, listen to her and talk about her experience and invite her to share and talk a little bit about things that we might learn from that experience, as well as just looking at different viewpoints and how orthodoxy can impact our work as social workers. Tiffany, do you want to share a little bit just about your background and help us get to know you and how you came to become a social worker?
Oh, sure. So my background, I'll start with my educational background. I am from New Orleans, Louisiana. I got a bachelor's degree in mass communication with a concentration on print journalism. I switched career paths to get a master's degree in social work. So I got my degree from the University of Missouri at Columbia, Mizzou, and I wasn't exactly ready to go out and put on my cape and save the world. So I kept going to school.
Way to go.
I got a PhD from Howard University, and I got a training that I never suspected. I got a training in research methodology, which includes statistics. So that's something that's when I reflect on my life, that's pretty shocking for me because as growing up, I was trained as a professional actor. So never in a zillion years did I anticipate being anybody's scientist. But here I am. So
That's great. Well, we're glad you're here. We're glad you made it. So tell us a little bit just about life experience. What drew you into social work?
oh wow. Well, I do come from a tumultuous background of childhood. My mother was very sick, and I think growing up, as I said, my path was, in my mind, was to go the direction of Broadway. I was expecting to be a professional actor for life. The Lord had other plans. I ended up going to college, and that was just because my best friend's mom, my best friend at the time, her mom forced me to apply to a college. So I did. I applied to the first college application that I put my fingers on, which was Dillard University. It was in alphabetical order in the counselor's office. And I applied. It's right here in my hometown. And I got accepted. And I focused on mass communication. Like I said, some things happened that derailed my professional acting career. So I ended up just kind of going through the motions in college. I was always a strong student because I liked school. And so I was in my major, but I really wasn't passionate about it. I It was all right. It was a nice career path. But I realized I really wanted to do something that was more along the lines of a helping profession. I really wanted to understand my mom. I wanted to understand what was going on with her. Um, and so I scoured the internet to find different career paths that would allow me to get some kind of understanding and training in what I would learn was psychotherapeutic interventions. And I was looking at psychology, didn't realize I'd get a PhD, had no interest in it. But I was looking at psychology and thought, well, I don't want to go to school that long. At the time, that was what I was thinking. And the alternative was social work. And what I liked about social work was that not only did you learn about psychotherapy and all these other things, it's such a vast field. But there it is. It's so vast that if I wanted to change my mind, I'd have other avenues that I could go. Um, and it's application based. You learn these things, but you apply them, and you get to do the work of helping people. Um, so I that's what led me to social work. I determined that that was the path. I could learn about this skill set and apply it, and it wouldn't take me 10 years or whatnot. I could do it in a reasonable time frame. So that's what led me to social work.
Then you became a researcher, is that correct? And decided to
Well,
do research that probably extended your career a little bit, extended your education at least. Is that right?
yeah, when I finished my master's degree, I was terrified. Social work is a serious
What were
profession.
you terrified of?
I was terrified of hurting someone,
Oh,
of
okay.
of working with someone and not being ready, not what if I make a mistake? What if I send someone to end up taking their life? These were my thoughts. I
You
know they're
really
not
wanted to
rational.
be competent. You really
Oh my
wanted
goodness.
competence matters to you.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And that's what I was afraid of. I was afraid of not being thoroughly prepared.
All right.
We said, okay, I'm not really ready to get out there yet. Let me keep going to school and see what happens.
All right.
And I wanted to get back to an HBCU. Um, and I
Which
looked up
is
schools of social
HBCU
work.
stands for Historically Black College University. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good.
I wanted to get back to an HBCU, and I wanted to, I felt like I needed more. I wasn't
Yeah.
ready. And Howard University came up as the first school of social work that was an HBCU, the first university that had a school of social work that was an HBCU. I said, well, I think I'll go to Howard. Howard is a prestigious university.
Yeah.
It's been mentioned in songs, and it's got a lot of media fare. And so
Right.
I said, let me this, and then my favorite television mom, Felicia Rashad, Claire Huxtable, went to Howard University. And
Oh, all
so,
right.
yes, and so I said, well, let me look into Howard. As I came in as the last entry, the last person accepted in my cohort with no research experience. I
Hmm.
had a research class that I didn't even realize was a research class in my master's program. And so I came in not knowing anything really about research, but I got it. I started getting it. It started clicking. I was paired with a phenomenal researcher, the person who wrote our textbook, and we've been working together ever since. Dr.
All
Abu
right.
Bader. We've been working together ever since, and working on a paper right now. And it just clicked. I got it. It
Great.
made sense.
Yeah.
And they asked me to start teaching it. I was nervous, but I taught, and I realized I have a skill for breaking things down for people
Yeah.
and getting them to understand it at the barest level, the barest minimal level, um, and then translating it into all the scientific scholarly language. So I realized I had a skill for teaching.
So
So that's how I
did you
entered
find that
academia.
your experience with research or lack of experience with research enabled you to kind of break it down to its essence and communicate it to those who have less experience in research? Was that helpful to you?
I think so, absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. And it just started to make sense. At some point, that light bulb went off for me and I got it. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Oh, I get it. I know why I'm doing a one-way ANOVA. Oh, I see. I see now how to calculate this and what this actually means. I know what this p-value means. Everything started to click.
Great.
So
Great. Very good. So where did you go after Howard? What was your experience after that?
I went right into academia.
Okay.
I started Clark Atlanta University. I still continue to do, throughout my academic career, I still continue doing social work. So I did have some experience working um, um, with different populations. I work with women who had been, who experienced domestic violence, interpersonal violence. I did some work with children, and I have a passion for children. I have a passion for life, just life at conception on till. So I realized I really had a passion for the life development stages
Sure.
and working with the elderly. And then eventually I would work with ex offenders. So I've been able to dabble in a little bit of social work, but my primary career has been social work in academia.
So
So
people
social work
across the
academia.
lifespan,
Yes.
from birth to geriatrics, those who've been victimized, those who've offended, you've had quite a vast experience. A
Yes, and I
lot of
want to say from conception, because I've had a chance to work with women who've been pregnant and
okay.
giving them resources,
That's
you know.
great. That's great.
Yeah.
What was your education like with regards to viewpoint diversity? Was that emphasized at all, or was it primarily just other elements of diversity?
Viewpoint diversity was definitely emphasized at Howard. Definitely. The the School of Social Work is accepting of. I'm speaking very generally. It's very
Hmm.
accepting of varying viewpoints, um, and varying backgrounds and cultures. So, and I think that comes from the fact that it is an HBCU, and most of the people who teach there are Black. So we've got that shared connectedness in terms of culture and some traditional beliefs that are held by Black American Hebrew culture. So
Okay. Interesting.
so being accepting of differing views definitely was emphasized at Howard. Um, it wasn't shunned at University of Missouri, but there was sometimes a push for certain ideologies.
Okay. So at Howard versus Missouri, did you experience dialoguing in class across different viewpoints? Were you exposed to some conflicts or conflicting viewpoints? Did you tell us a little bit about just your educational experience as a student?
Yeah. Well, MU I had a different experience at MU. For one, it seemed as though it seemed to me that most people believed the same thing, but I was the only Black American in the class.
Okay.
So I came from a different culture. Whereas everyone else was a white American and had shared beliefs. I applaud that, actually. I don't say that in a derogatory way. I think there's something very beautiful about culture. And it's not to say that everybody is going to have the same idea who's in a culture.
Hmm.
However, there's something beautiful about a stringed line of thinking. And I do appreciate that. But I more so appreciate where there are people who challenge the string line and say, wait a minute, um, why are we doing this particular thing? Why are we thinking this way? And just applaud that. My experience as a student, I don't believe that my professors um, made me feel silenced, but I definitely had different worldview. Definitely did.
Gotcha. So how were those different worldviews? Talk a little bit about that. Because you appreciated some of those differences, that diversity, and it sounds like you actually experienced more diverse viewpoints at Howard than you did at MU. Is that right?
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
If
And so
you,
how was that tolerated? How did those differences, how did they manage that in the classroom?
um, the professor, I would say at MU, my professors were, well, let me put this in a context. Um, there was a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of animosity towards Christian worldviews.
Oh, okay.
Um, and because of that, when one student would say something negative about a Christian or a believer or someone from a Christian religion, a lot of students would be like, "That's right, yeah, yeah," and then I'd always have to raise my little hand. And I was called on, and I would express myself, but there was dead silence. But my professors, I feel, were accepting of me being able to express myself.
Great.
Um,
So your
in most,
educational, your student cohort was a little bit, uh, um, well, homogenous in their viewpoints about religion or about Christianity, and you introduced an element of diversity to that. And your faculty, it sounds like your professors were supportive of that. Is that right?
absolutely, I
Oh,
do. I
great.
would say that's pretty accurate. Yeah,
Excellent. Excellent.
that was accurate. It
Very
did
good.
feel a little isolating because I think I was one of three believers in a class full of 15 people. So it did feel a little bit isolating. And then I was the only one who was willing to speak. I usually find myself in that position that I'm
Okay.
the person who's going to say what a lot of people are thinking but don't want to say. Or
Okay.
I'm the person who's going to say what people are really terrified to say because maybe they don't want to get penalized. But someone has to say something. And I'm usually that person.
Okay, so not only were you a racial minority, but you were also a religious minority within that cohort. Is that right?
Yes, I don't actually use the word minority, but you can. I'm not saying you shouldn't.
Okay, all
But to
right,
your point, the answer is
sure.
yes.
That you were not in the majority. Describe that a little bit? What term? How would you describe that? What
Oh,
words do you use?
I'm a melaninated person.
Okay.
Yes, you know why I stopped using the term minority?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Say more
again,
about
and
that.
I'm not at all telling you what to say, Matt.
No, this is good.
I
This is
stopped
helpful.
using it because the root word of minority is minor,
Oh,
and the root word of majority is major. And I don't like that. I don't like the idea of um, me calling myself minor to another human being
yeah.
calling themselves major. I'm
Okay.
minor to God. That's how I express it. I will bow
Oh,
to the Lord,
great.
but to a human being, we are humans. We're equal.
Beautiful. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I like that. I like that perspective. Xander,
Thank
have you heard of that before? Is that
No, but it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
I also would imagine that for some people who take a similar perspective for a different reason, might just say, well, there's a power differential
Yes.
between minor and major, right? And when you think about military ranks, um, or small and large, right? So that people might not like it for a number of reasons. So I like that we were able to hear your reason for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you, instead of using minority or even groups, do you use language to differentiate groups, or do you just simply focus on a person and avoid the use of group identity?
Oh, I love group identity. And so, and I love that there are differences in our groups, which is why I'm really happy about this whole dialogue, because
Yeah.
why do we have to all be the same? Why? I love differences. And so I do emphasize group differences. I think they're beautiful. Um, it's the value judgment that goes along with it that I steer from.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So just avoiding
Anything that
the,
implies a value,
yeah.
placing a value judgment on
Gotcha.
the group. Yeah.
Gotcha. So minority groups, I mean, that's just anathema to your way of seeing things. You see things much differently than minority groups. You just see there are groups of people, but there's not a value judgment, a hierarchy, if you will. Is that right?
Right, right, and you're right. There's not a hierarchy. There's not an inherent hierarchy.
Okay.
That's a part I'm focusing on.
Sure.
Um, as far as differences between people groups, um, I I love I love the fact that I'm a black person. I'm melanated, right?
Hmm.
Um, th- but I don't share. I'm not the only person here in America.
Right.
I share the country with people who are not melanated,
Who are unmelanated?
right? Non-melanated,
What?
because melanin is just the degree of having brown pigment in your skin,
All right.
eyes, and hair.
Well, I thought maybe you were just talking about Xander and my melon because we don't have much on it. So that's pretty good. All
Well, I
right,
have a
I
little more than
understand.
you. A little
Understand.
more.
Yes, you do. You do.
It's the
I.
Mexican in me.
Hey, way to go. That's what I like to see. Very good. So at Howard, there was. I mean, you had that experience at MU. At Howard, how did they invite viewpoint diversity in a way that was different than at MU? What did you experience there?
Um, well, well, what I experienced was we just share our viewpoints. What do you think? But at Howard, whatever you say you think, whatever you say you believe, you have to support it. As long as you're able to support what you believe, go for it. But where you can't support it, there are challenges. Let's talk about that. You've stated this. Have you considered that? And so it was good because it allowed you to be challenged in your thinking.
Hmm.
So I
So
really,
when you provided support at Howard or anywhere else, did you have to provide empirical support for it, or could you provide non-empirical support? In other words, values or those kinds of things as well.
um, values were important
Hmm.
because values are affirmed. Howard uses the Black perspective,
Uh huh.
so differing differences in values are emphasized. However, because it is academia, we can't just start talking about, oh, I feel this way, I believe that.
Yeah.
We have to be able to support what we're saying.
Okay.
Um,
With some type of a theoretical background, with some type of a theoretical context, with some type of empirical support. Is that right?
yes, empirical support, um, logic, facts, something that links the ideas.
Okay.
So there is no just talking at Howard. That no way.
Great. So logic and reason were your ways to connect with people who had different viewpoints than you. You didn't
Absolutely.
have to strip yourself of your Christian background, your Christian beliefs. You just had to use facts, logic, and reason as the lane to which you could bridge with people who had maybe different religious beliefs, different theoretical beliefs. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We could still use our religion, but the idea wasn't certainly never to try to make somebody else your religion.
Yeah.
That's for a different space,
Yeah.
not in academia. But definitely, we're allowed to bring our whole selves. So to talk about, oh, leave your values out the door, outside the door. No, you bring your whole self to a space.
Okay.
What you don't do is demand or force somebody or compel somebody to accept your way. But
Mm.
you bring yourself, present yourself, and if someone else likes it, cool. If they're like, oh, I'm good,
Yep.
I, I like the way I think,
Yep.
then that's cool too.
Very good.
So then now let's take a pivot, because you graduate from that program, you get your PhD, and then you're hired at a university to go
Yes.
teach. And then sounds to me like you didn't find the same pursuit of intellectual honesty in that space. You want to tell us a little bit
Um,
about, like, sort of how things started, and not where they've ended up, but at least what the experience was like for you in that teaching position.
sure. So I started off at Clark Atlanta, and then I went on. I ended up getting very sick. I had a terrible arm injury, put me out of work for somewhere around 2 years. Was able to go back. It wasn't until I got to Tulane University a few years ago. So my academic career began in 2013. While at Tulane, and I do say the university's name because I've worked at a lot of Southern universities. So um, I don't want to misrepresent any of those other institutions. It was at Tulane, which is in the Deep South in New Orleans, where things really shifted for me, and I had a totally different experience teaching than I had as a student. Um, I was welcome in this space, generally speaking, as a student, and I can say I was not welcome as an academic at Tulane. Um, who I am, what I bring to the table, my whole self was not welcome.
So say more about that. Like describe
Definitely.
that.
Sure. Well, just to briefly tell the incident of what happened that led to um, everything. I just to keep it short and sweet. I did not, in a class setting, I did not affirm the idea that men give birth. Um, when a student said this, and instead, I didn't openly disagree, which I unequivocally do, but I didn't at that. I did disagree. I didn't verbally express disagreement. What I did instead was I asked the question. I said, "Well, let's talk about this. What is gender?" And that question led to a backlash like I've never experienced in my life. The student who brought up the idea of men giving birth, who I asked the question to, what is gender? That student ultimately filed a formal complaint against me. Um, I was accused of sexually harassing her. Her friends launched a revolt to get me fired and get me blackballed from all American universities. And then after that, I was just under an awful lot of scrutiny. I was told at some point that I needed to embrace the new language, and the new language was not using any gendered language. Here's a perfect example. I asked the question, I said, well, how do I refer to my mother? Because my mom at the time, we were going on a year of her passing away. And I said, well, we're getting ready to honor my mom's like 1 year passing. I don't know the way to say that 1 year anniversary of having passed away. It's my mother. What do I say? And I was told, you, instead of saying mother, you say the gestational parent.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, that's absolutely not happening.
Wow.
Absolutely not happening.
Huh.
And in that same conversation, I was told I was only permitted to use postmodernism as a theory to teach.
Wow. Okay.
So it's very much, this is the line of thinking, this is the language
Right.
we're using. You must use it as well.
Interesting. Can you, Xander or Tiffany, could you explain a little bit about what postmodernism is? Just briefly, just kind of succinctly share.
Absolutely.
Tiffany,
I'll,
you wanna take it as a professor? I'm sure you're quite well versed in it. For me, it'd be a lot of opinion about things, I think.
well, postmodernism is a worldview, it's a perspective that, just in a nutshell, everything you believe is right. And it's right because you make truth. There is no objective reality, there's no objective truth. Truth is whatever you say is true. So, as a result, because the student said men give birth, well, now that is true. There's a problem with that, though. The limitation to the theory is that it doesn't account for errors in reasoning, and it doesn't account for contrasting viewpoints. So, for example, the young lady said men give birth. Well, when I turn around and say men do not give birth, these are conflicting ideas, but under the same theory, both ideas are correct. Only in that space, her viewpoint was the one that was accepted.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's what's
So
really
that,
interesting to me. It's like if there's no truth, like no meta truth, but when one person says their truth, somehow that their truth becomes the truth, which then violates postmodernism. So
Bingo.
I don't understand how it's not understood that you can't force your truth onto other people.
You know what? And I don't, that's the thing. I think that where there is a line of reasoning or an idea that's being pushed and heavily promoted, and it's under the guise of postmodernism, it suddenly becomes the accepted way of thinking. And if you go against that, then you're violating postmodernism and you're being hateful. I was called so many names, things I never even heard of. And so I absolutely, Xander, there's a contradiction, and there's an inherent embedded contradiction in postmodernism perspective in and of itself. The idea that anything is true ultimately means nothing is.
Yeah. And I could imagine, for example, as a trans man, I could imagine that some people might take a nuanced approach and say a trans man who has retained reproductive capacity is capable of getting pregnant and carrying a baby to term and then having that baby. So in the modern, lexicon, that would be I'd be a trans man who's having a baby, but that's different from just saying men can get pregnant. It's like, well, trans men who are female sexed with a reproductive system that holds babies, right? It's like, do you think that nuance would have been acceptable in that setting?
Ultimately, that's where we did get to. Because initially the students said men give birth, and then said men have uteruses, and then went on to say, well, I'm talking about trans men. And I said, okay, well, what is a trans man? She went to explain. And I asked the question because I wanted to hear her response. And so I heard her response. And so I think from that perspective, I get what's being said, that this person is identifying as a trans man Therefore, a trans man gave birth. Or, just to say it plainly, a man gave birth. But I pose an objection to that, in that there could be an issue with the labeling. So if a person labels themselves, if I label myself as anything, if I label myself as, I'll just say a giraffe. If I label myself as a giraffe, would someone say, "Oh, honey, my colleague, the giraffe, is about to teach statistics, bivariate statistics"? So I think there's an issue with the labeling. But even that idea, and again, I want to say something. That's my viewpoint. That there's something going on with the labeling. There was no room for even that kind of conversation, because what I say ultimately is, and what I ended up telling my student is, you're free to believe whatever you like. I'm not here to tell you not to believe what you believe. If you shape your belief around your statement, around whatever core values you have, or whatever constellation of viewpoints you hold, they're yours, and you're more than welcome to express them. Others can challenge and present their ideas, but in no way does a challenging or expression resort to, this is what I say and you must believe it.
Yeah.
That should never happen. We're all we're free to express ourselves.
So the postmodernism applied as long as it was in the context of deconstruction of of the social norms. It didn't necessarily apply to bridging understanding or to tolerating different viewpoints. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say. I think that it doesn't. It didn't apply at all to understanding different viewpoints, or even getting pushback, or getting a challenge. It didn't apply to any of that.
So,
It's simply
Xander, I'd
go to
be
believe
interested.
this.
Yeah,
Go with it.
Xander, if you were in that classroom as a trans man trying to maybe nuance that a little bit, if you have somebody in there saying that, gender, anything is gender, or, putting forward the postmodern viewpoint of gender, how would you suggest, or how would you have responded if you were a student in that classroom?
Well, I think I would just speak very plainly and say, while I appreciate your attempt to be an advocate for trans men, as a trans man, I take issue with your declaration that men can get pregnant, because I know specifically that you're referring to people like me, except not me exactly, because I don't have those reproductive organs anymore. But if I did, and I have friends who have bore children, looking like me. So I know that this exists. But I think and I think this is one of the intentions of postmodernism, in that deconstruction, or in the attempt to completely discombobulate reality, to make a declarative statement like men get pregnant, and then have such an extreme reaction to wanting to get you fired, and having people gang up on you, which is a bully tactic, is very authoritarian. I think it goes against the grain of what it means to be a social worker. That I would not support whatsoever. And so then now there would be a conflict between that student and myself. And it would be really interesting to see how the administration would deal with an actual trans man saying, I take issue with what you're saying. And quite frankly, I don't need you to be an advocate for me or my community, right? Like, I can speak for myself. Let us speak for ourselves, because we're not a monolith, and we don't all agree with that changing of the language, that destabilization act of trying to, it's like if you're a social worker and you go work on a OBGYN floor, right? And you're at the bedside with patients, it's probably going to be very rare that you're going to have somebody that looks like me on that unit. It might happen once a year, if maybe once in a career you might experience it. So, who are the majority of people that we're going to be encountering in pregnancy centers and OBGYN clinics, right? Who are we going to be encountering? And so it seems to me like we had the conversation about majority minority, but where I think
Yeah.
it comes into play is if we're working in a particular setting with a particular patient or client population, would if I was working in a pregnancy center, an OBGYN clinic, if I was if I was told I'm now supposed to go into this setting and tell all of those women, you are now just gestational parents or people with uteruses or womb havers, I think most of them would be quite insulted, right? So it's like this like theoretical conversation in a classroom before compared to the a practical, like you talked about. It's a very practical, field social work, the applied component of social work in those settings with those populations. I think I'd be laughed out if I started just referring to all the women in those settings as gestational parents or people with wombs or uteruses. And I think that's offensive.
Uterus
That's
lovers. Yeah.
taking women down to their bodily organs. I find offensive.
Hmm.
Yes, and there's something, Xander, there's something so beautiful. This is just these are the things that I find beautiful in the earth. I find the sexes beautiful. And so to strip away women's ability, it's not an actual stripping away, but the verbal and the ideology, the ideology, presenting an ideology that, oh, well, you're just a uterus haver. You're like you said, how did you say it? A womb haver, a birthing person. What?
Mm-mm.
What is that's hurtful because there's something beautiful about being called a woman. The same as there's something beautiful about being called a man. And again, this is just my opinion. It's one of the things I find beautiful in the earth.
Well, we welcome your viewpoints. So you're
Yeah.
doing,
Yeah,
Well,
keep it
yeah,
coming.
you can,
yeah,
I think too often for a parallel to this would be if as a clinician we have a particular affinity or we end up with a particular clientele that is all men. Like when I was working at the VA, I worked exclusively with men. And so I would post things on my Facebook back in the day, like 10 years ago, about men's mental health. And one of my colleagues, out in the field, not working with me at the VA, would say, oh, I didn't know you became a men's rights activist. Because it's like, because I was, as if that's a bad thing, right? It's like, but the idea is that if you are supporting and um, championing men's mental health, somehow you're anti-woman, you're sexist, you're misogynist. So in a similar
yeah.
case, we do not have to denigrate men and women, males and females, in order to support, or in the language of the affirm trans people. We can simultaneously uphold the biology of male and female while simultaneously, supporting, if we are so inclined. I don't think we should force people to accept anything, but if we're so inclined, we can also support the human dignity and the human rights of trans people. We don't have to pick or choose. And I feel like we're pitted against each other. It's like you
Absolutely.
you 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 can't you can't support me supposedly, right? You wouldn't be able to be, sorry, I lost my camera. You wouldn't be able to be supportive of me, it's said, because you're not using the right language.
Right.
But I don't require you to use specific language.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
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 Sorry, I'm going to exit out
Mhm.
again. My
No, that's
camera went
okay.
off.
So as you know, with the NASW Code of Ethics, 4.02 talks about discrimination, and that we should not discriminate based on a variety of things, things that are differentiated: race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, marital status, political belief, religion, immigration, or mental or physical ability. So the code of ethics precludes us from, as social workers, from discriminating based upon those things. It's interesting that belief, political belief, religion, those kinds of things seem to have taken a subservient position
Yeah.
in your educational experience there, Tiffany. And I would be
Absolutely.
interested to know, just kind of, if you could maybe finish the story for us. What happened, and how did it? And I'd also be interested in how that was justified, or what was the perspective from the institution in proceeding as they did.
Well, what happened ultimately was I had to undergo several trainings. I did undergo several trainings. I had to have my classes observed. I had to meet with a woman who who asked me what she wanted to know. Eventually, what is my gender identity? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I okay, I'm not going to discuss that. That's I ended up having to
Yeah,
express myself through email and say, I'm not going to discuss that. I'm not having that conversation. But that, I had to, like I said, I had
seems
my
like a
classes
trap.
observed.
That if you
Pardon?
acknowledge, it seems like a trap. That if you
Yeah.
acknowledge gender identity, then you have to be retrained or rehabilitated. You have to have your classes. Well, no, I don't want to mock you or them at all. I just
You,
want to say um, that while having this experience, you had to be re-educated. You had to be you had to demonstrate. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but what's the difference between having to be re-educated, be re-supervised in your education, going through somebody who's going to deconstruct gender identity, or make sure that you are adopting the postmodern viewpoint.
you, there is no difference. And, I ended up saying, because I've had to do a lot of writing, this is conversion therapy.
Yeah. What is the
Ultimately,
difference?
what's the difference?
It makes
Yeah.
me
This
think of a struggle session under Maoist control.
Well, or just because it's a it's a philosophical belief that there isn't empirical, logical, rational basis that enables us to dialogue across diversity. That it's essentially coercing you to
Yeah.
adopt a certain unempirical viewpoint. It seems like proselytizing. It seems like that we went from, and I think there's room in the world for proselytizing. It's just not necessarily in a secular academic setting. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and the other piece to this, and I think this is something that was lost on all of them when it comes back, going back to postmodernism perspective for a moment, that's a theory.
mm-hmm,
Theories are ways of explaining phenomena.
mm-hmm,
Okay, and they're based on observations and crafting, putting variables together to help to understand and explain what we're observing.
yeah,
And so, it's interesting. We use observations to explain what we're observing, but it's a way of explaining phenomena. These are not facts.
mm-hmm,
And so, the idea of forcing somebody to adapt a specific type of mindset and use only one type of theory. This is a broadband theory, and underneath it falls other theories. The main one that's implicated here is social constructionism.
Yeah.
Okay, and so which says reality is socially constructed.
Right.
Gender is constructed. It's socially constructed. There, there are some theories that counter that. Gender is not socially constructed.
Sure.
But this theory, the thing I like about theories is with me, I teach, when I teach theories, I never teach one theory. Never just going to teach, I'm never just going to teach, conflict theory without teaching functionalism. I always teach a counter because what that does is it allows the students to make their own decision and select a theory that they find that's appropriate. The same with critical race theory. I think it's a fine theory. It does a nice job of explaining some things, not everything. It's not appropriate for everything. It has limitations like all theories, and that's something that gets completely lost.
Okay.
It's a theory. The postmodernism, a theory. Social constructionism, theories. They all have their limitations.
Great.
So to force somebody to believe in something that is not a fact is really problematic.
Well, believe and adopt. Adopt.
Yeah,
It's like, it's one thing to say, in this class today, we're going to read some literature, or we're going to read a case study, and then we're going to apply these four lenses to our interpretation of that experience or that story. And so you can see, all the different ways that you can view a situation in all these multiple ways and trying to make sense of, well, what matches or what fits or which is going to provide us the avenue to assisting that individual with getting whatever resources they need. Or, right, it's taking it out of the theoretical and back into the applied. And so for them to be reinforcing and or forcing you to change your beliefs and adopt an entire mindset that goes against your own, personal way that you believe in your mindset, it doesn't even make sense to me that they would. Why do they even have classes that teach different theoretical or orientations?
Right. It's really a violation of academic freedom. Professors are permitted to bring their scholarship into the class space. And not just their scholarship, their beliefs. You can't just go out spouting, this is what I believe and that's it. No, it has to be contextualized around scholarship. However, we are permitted that. And to tell a professor you only are permitted to teach this one theory is a direct violation of academic freedom. And it's stifling and it does a disservice to the students. The students are not getting the opportunity to really do what academia is supposed to do. The whole point of academia, from its inception until now, is to produce great thinkers.
Yeah.
That's the point of academia. But that's been lost. It's been lost in a goal to ultimately indoctrinate students with a way of thinking.
So you are not opposed to the introduction of theory in social work education. Is that correct?
Correct.
You are not opposed.
Postmodernism has a place.
Exactly. You are not
It has.
opposed to introducing various theories. What I'm hearing you say is that the opposition is imposing theoretical orientation onto students.
Exactly. Exactly. Instead of
Or
my thing
faculty.
is right. Teach, like I said, anytime I teach a theory, I teach its counterpart. Okay. So that students are able to see from both lenses. So, Matt, going back to when you asked me what happened afterward,
Yeah.
2 sessions, I believe it was 2 sessions after that one, I had to teach on the difference between sex and gender. I said, oh my gosh. And it was a prescribed syllabus. So I didn't create the topics. So I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm dreading having to teach this. But I did. And again, I presented two theories. One theory is that the two concepts are distinct. Sex is biological, gender is socially constructed. That's one idea. I taught the other. I presented the counter theory that they are interchangeable. The term gender comes from the term genre, which was used to say what is your type, what is your kind, what is your genre of sex. That's how it came about. And so, in doing that, I presented a paper by a researcher who admitted, his name was Christopher Dummett. He admitted that he made up his theory that sex is socially constructed. Now, to put that into context, he built the theory off of Jean Monnet's theory that gender is socially constructed back in the 60s. Fast forward to the late 90s, Christopher Dummett presents this paper saying sex is socially constructed as well. But then in 2019, he wrote an essay saying he made his whole theory up. It was never tested. I was able to present both ideas.
How'd that go over?
And oh, it went over terribly. The students were offended. By this point, the chair of the program was sitting in on my class. She had been sitting in on my classes. And when I presented the paper, she's like, oh, this is Christian. This is Christian. She starts waving her phone in the air. Everybody, this is Christian. What? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, this is from a Christian outlet. No, it's not. What I didn't know what she was talking about. Apparently, Focus on the Family, who I don't even listen to. Okay, I'm not saying anything negative about Focus on the Family. I'm sure it's wonderful. I don't listen to it. But Focus on the Family, which is a Christian radio station or something, radio program, I believe.
It's kind of a think tank. They generate a lot of research.
Okay, they picked it up. They picked up this article, and because they posted it on their website, oh, you're promoting Christianity. The students were complaining. They were upset. They started crying. Students said that I was promoting transphobia. And I said, what in the world? This is really unbelievable. So I ended up having to get the class under control. I said, let me just be perfectly clear. Number one, I did not know this was on Focus on the Family. I don't even listen to Focus on the Family. But even if I did, number two, you're arguing because it's posted on a Christian platform. So what? Do you have a problem with Christianity? Because you have Christians in your classroom. Number three, why are we ignoring the author of a theory? Forget where it's posted. Forget what the platform is promoting it. Because I'm sure Focus on a Family has some agenda in promoting that.
Sure.
They're irrelevant. Forget them. The focus is on the author who wrote this essay saying, I made up my theory. Now, and I gave the students an example. I said, I'm going to give you an example. What if, and I'm not saying this is true, I'm sure he didn't do this, but I'm giving an example. What if Albert Bandura, the founder of social learning theory, said 30 years later, hey, y'all, sorry, I didn't beat up that Bobo doll. I made the whole entire thing up. If he confessed that, it would be important for us to know that his theory was simply made up. It was never tested.
Sure.
How does that not hold true for this person? And the reason he came out with the essay was because he said that he felt responsible for promoting this theory when people were getting fired from their jobs. Women were not allowed to use the bathrooms in their own spaces. Men were able to go into the women's spaces, and if they were not allowed or if they were kicked out, there would be repercussions. In Canada, there are laws.
Yeah.
Exactly. He saw the impact of his
saw
theory.
the impact of it and thought, hey, I need to take responsibility for this, correct it, and so forth.
Yeah,
Tiffany,
it didn't go over well. It really
yeah,
didn't.
yeah. So Tiffany, when
Even
you,
knowing that, they
yeah,
ended up saying, "This is transphobic. You've got to go."
okay, Tiffany, uh, we've got to wrap up here in a minute. Could you just summarize briefly what impact did that have on you as a social worker, as social work faculty? Could you just kind of help us understand where you're at right now?
Yeah, well, it hurt me deeply. I was devastated. It made me feel as though I was. It made me feel as though I did something wrong. There's a polarizing tactic that's been used. Xander, you spoke to this earlier. There's this tactic of separating us, of oh well, if you don't affirm me, if you don't celebrate me, you hate me. And that, for somebody to have to sit and think about, oh my gosh, could this be true? I don't hate anybody.
Yeah,
I'm not, I have no hatred for anyone.
right.
In my religion, I'm a born again believer. I am taught to love people and love in truth. You don't just go with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Love doesn't mean accepting everything, but
Sure.
I'm taught to love people and to give the truth in love but to be beautiful. That's
Yeah.
what I'm taught. So here I was just really taking this onto my own character, but I had to be reminded of truth that it's a polarizing tactic, it's a marketing tactic, in fact, and to really be able to see truth and see it for what it was. So where I am now, um, I was pretty disenchanted. I will say that because I find the social work core values to be so beautiful.
Yep.
I love our profession's
Exactly.
core values.
Yep.
But I did end up um, being kind of resentful and feeling as though I'm not welcome as a social worker. But then I had to say, you know what? I've been a voice my whole life. I guess that's my little role in life. God has given me a voice, and
Yeah.
I've been that person. Okay, so here I am, and I've taken it on to myself to say, I'm going to be the person to really speak on this and dispel these untruths.
You're going to
And
be a
so,
social worker to the polarizing. You're going to be a social worker to those who are different than you. You're going to be a social worker to stand in the breach between acknowledging and allowing for postmodernism and those who do not necessarily want to espouse postmodernism. You're,
absolutely allowing for postmodernism and positivism.
yeah, you're bridging between the two. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Xander, anything else that you'd like to ask or go over with Tiffany before we wrap up?
Well, I just want to say I really appreciate hearing more of your story. And I just want to offer from one trans person that I I appreciate that you stand on your convictions and your principles, and that you, to a certain extent, you didn't let the bullies win. They pushed you out of a job, but they didn't break you. Right? The tactic of demoralizing did not work, and so I'm happy to hear that, and I hope that you find other avenues to share your wisdom and your knowledge with other social work students or other kinds of students very soon, because you have a true gift of being able, as you said, to be able to explain things in ways that people can understand, and that's really, it's helpful, especially with such a complex subject like statistics and research. Those are difficult things for people to grasp. And so being able to make those easily understandable is a true gift.
Exactly.
Thank you, Xander.
Welcome.
Well, and just recognizing that you are standing for something. You are pro social work. You are standing
Yeah.
for social work. I'm not hearing you say that you took an anti stance. You weren't being provocative or intending to be provocative by asking a question. but sometimes we do have to ask provocative questions that invite thought, that invite us to reason a little bit, to understand different perspectives. And I certainly appreciate what you shared tonight, and appreciate you being a pro social worker. We will post
Thank you.
this podcast and others at prosocialworkers.com, where social workers can go. The content is always free. You only pay for continuing education, but you are a really great example of being a pro social worker. And I'd like to just give you an opportunity to end with the last thought here. Tiffany, what does it mean to you to be pro social?
Oh, wow. Pro social. My first thought that comes to mind is to um, be for people, to be for people, to to work with people, and to do your best when working with people. Everybody doesn't always um, mesh well, but do your best when working with people, um, and to just to uplift each other. We're all different. And like I said earlier, that's what makes. I mean, what a beautiful world. What if there were 8 billion Tiffany's? That would be boring. First of all, I talk way too much. So that there'd be no listening, right? It's pro social is to me is about just being for each other, standing
Right.
for each other, with each other, chastising, correcting each other, but loving each other, telling each other the truth, and being for each other.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany, for coming and sharing your perspective. Thank you for standing in the breach and doing the work of a pro social worker. And thank you for being for people and for being for diversity. So thank you very much, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.